Tom suddenly said to me, "Hey, I have to go to work now. Emily, you walk to the hospital." What? I have to walk there alone? To my surprise, he said this out of the blue. Feeling delirious from a fever exceeding 40 degrees, I reflexively questioned Tom, who was driving. The car was moving on a dark road with hardly any pedestrians. I had developed a sudden high fever and Tom was taking me to the hospital by car. When I had a fever and asked to be taken to the hospital, Tom seemed a bit upset. I was about to call an ambulance because I was in such a bad state, but Tom stopped me saying, "It's a nuisance to call an emergency vehicle for just a fever." So, this is how he ended up driving me. While I was lost in these thoughts, Tom stopped the car, got out, and opened the passenger door. He probably intended to drag me out of the car. With my weakened hands due to the fever, I desperately clung to the passenger seat. However, my resistance was futile. Tom forcefully pulled me out and almost threw me outside. "Take care of the rest yourself. It's just an hour's walk to the hospital, right? Remember, don't bother others." And with that, Tom left me behind and drove away. "Please, Tom, come back. Stop, please." The car quickly disappeared into the distance. Even though I knew Tom couldn't hear me, all I could do was desperately call out for his help. I was completely drained, unable to stand. Tears flowed as I sobbed, and with a feeble voice, all I could do was plead for help. "Please, help me, someone." My name is Emily. I'm a housewife turning 40 this year. Living in a regional city, I had been leading a peaceful life with my husband Tom and our 16-year-old son John. I met Tom through a mutual friend. At the beginning of our relationship, Tom would always say, "I'm going to be successful, and I want you to be there with me." Seeing Tom's optimistic and ambitious attitude, I thought, if I marry this man, a happy and bright future might be waiting for us. The early days of our marriage were truly blissful. He worked at a major company with a stable income, so we had no financial worries. We spent our weekends watching movies together, shopping, and enjoying our time. However, as our son John grew, our daily life began to change little by little. Tom never participated in childcare. When John was a baby, Tom never changed a diaper or helped with his bath. Despite being able to take time off, Tom never attended John's school events. Come to think of it, we never went on a family trip together, just the three of us. Tom barely engaged with John as a father. As a result, the bond between John and Tom grew thin, and they hardly ever speak now. I try to mend our family's relationship, but Tom always excused himself saying, "I'm exhausted from work," and refused to discuss further, so nothing improved. Over time, I realized that Tom was actually quite timid. His bragging and ambitious talk came not from a place of ambition, but from a need to show off. The words he frequently told me before our marriage, "I'm going to achieve more, please be with me," might have been just to keep me from leaving him for someone else. While Tom might earn more than the average male employee, he doesn't seem to be advancing much compared to his colleagues. I don't necessarily want him to be more successful, but I do wish he would value our family more. Then, one day, after sending John, who is in a soccer club, to morning practice, I was preparing breakfast when Tom woke up and walked into the living room, closely examining the breakfast menu laid out on the table. It was the usual toasted bread, salad, and onion soup. Tom sat down and tasted the soup first. "What's this?" "Huh? Is there something different? It's the usual soup, isn't it?" I always taste test when I cook, and I didn't think anything was different today. Yet, Tom slammed down his bowl and exclaimed, "I can't eat this. It's terrible," and left without eating any further. After that, Tom began to constantly complain about the food I made. For lunch, he'd say his lunchbox was inedible and hardly ate it. For dinner, he'd comment on being exhausted from work and question how I could serve him such meals, avoiding the food entirely. Not just about meals, but Tom began to complain about laundry and cleaning as well. He'd point out wrinkles in the laundry hang outside, or run his finger along windowsills, commenting on the dust. Despite me doing the household chores as usual, he suddenly became critical. Often, when he complained, he'd compare saying, "Other women do household chores much better." It was suspicious since Tom shouldn't have seen any other woman besides me or his mother doing housework. Furthermore, he began to keep his smartphone with him at all times, even taking it into the bathroom. His secretive phone calls in his study became frequent, and his behavior became suspicious. I felt there might be another woman and grew increasingly anxious, fearing that he was cheating on me. I checked Tom's bag and sneaked a peek at his phone at night while he slept, but I found no evidence. I considered hiring a private investigator, but Tom managed our finances, making it difficult for me to spend money freely, so I had to reluctantly give up. Days passed with this uneasy feeling. I felt more stressed than ever before as my conversations with Tom dwindled day by day. Every time he spoke, it was only to complain. Perhaps it was a result of this, but one last night, I suddenly woke up with a high fever. Since Tom and I had been sleeping in separate rooms recently, I couldn't call out for help. Desperately, crawling on the floor, I tried to make my way to the living room. My smartphone, which I usually keep by my side, was in the living room on this particular night. My vision gradually blurred, and everything seemed too close in me. It might have been an overreaction, but I genuinely felt my life was in danger at that moment. I reached for the smartphone on the living room table to call an ambulance, and just then, Tom entered the room. "Emily, what on earth are you doing up at this hour?" Even as I felt faint from the fever, I tried to explain the situation to him. I thought he was going to take my phone to call for help. I felt relieved, only to hear words from Tom I never would have expected. "What's the big deal about a fever? You're going to call an ambulance for this? The neighbors will find out, and it will be a nuisance. You can't even do household chores, but you are really good at causing me trouble. Just go to sleep. The fever will go away if you rest." Tears filled my eyes as I listened to Tom's complaints, which he seemed to prioritize over my well-being. "Please don't say things like that. Just take me to the hospital. If you don't want an ambulance, at least drive me there. Please, Tom, take me in your car." With all the strength I could muster, I pleaded with him. I could barely speak because of the high fever. I kept repeating, "Please, please," trying to convey my feelings. Finally, due to my persistence, Tom agreed to drive me. Great, I have work tomorrow. Now I won't get any sleep. What do you expect me to do? Tom grumbled as he drove. I sat silently in the passenger seat, listening to the rain hit the windows and his complaints. About 5 minutes after leaving the house, Tom's smartphone rang. He pulled over to the side of the road and answered the call. After a brief conversation, Tom said, "Hey, I have to head to work now. Emily, you can walk to the hospital." Huh? You're working at this hour? I have to walk there alone? When I expressed my surprise, Tom showed visible anger. What? Do you think I'm lying? I understand you have to work, but can you drop me at the hospital first? It's close by a car from here, right? Considering the high fever I had and the heavy rain outside, walking to the hospital seemed nearly impossible. I desperately held on the passenger seat, hoping he wouldn't force me out. However, Tom got out of the driver's seat, carelessly opened the passenger door, unbuckled my seatbelt, and tried to drag me out. Damn it, just get out quickly. With that, Tom forcefully pulled me out of the car. The force of being dragged out was so intense that I injured my palms and knees. In the darkness, I couldn't see clearly, but I felt blood oozing from my wounds. Ow, why would you do that? I yelled at Tom, but he just snorted and returned to the driver's seat, accelerating the car away. Tom's car disappeared into the distance. All I could do was watch the car get smaller and smaller. The rain grew heavier, and I felt my fever rising. Tom had taken my phone, and there was no one inside on the rainy night street. I had to somehow walk to the hospital. In my feverish state, I struggled and crawled towards the hospital. Tom should have contacted the hospital I was scheduled to visit in advance. I was sure the hospital staff were waiting. There will also be other patients waiting for their appointments, so I couldn't waste time. Even as my consciousness grew hazy, I was determined to reach the hospital. I got lost on the way, took rest due to exhaustion, but eventually arrived. It had been over 2 hours since I left home. My car, it would have been a mere 15 minutes or so. As I approached the hospital entrance, I saw a nurse standing behind the glass door. The moment our eyes met, a wave of relief washed over me, and I lost consciousness. When I next woke up, I was lying in the bed. Thanks to the IV and medicine, my body temperature seemed to have decreased. I felt a deep sense of fatigue and was blankly staring at the ceiling when I heard a familiar voice. It was my son, John. Are you okay? How are you feeling, Mom? John looked into my face with a worried expression. John, I'm okay. I'm sorry for making you worry. Wait a minute, why is John here? I wondered and tried to get up, and John, smiling gently, supported me. To my surprise, Tom was slumping in a chair in the room. His clothes were soaking wet, and his usually well-set hair was messy, probably from the wind. Tom's legs were trembling slightly. What happened? Hey, Dad, Mom's awake. Don't you have something to say? John addressed Tom loudly. Tom, looking surprised and shaky, turned to me. He looked extremely exhausted, with dark circle under his eyes. I'm sorry, Emily. I apologize. Tom apologized in a barely audible voice. John looked at Tom with lingering dissatisfaction, but then turned to me and began explaining what had happened. After Tom had dragged me out of the car, he apparently went back home. John, having heard our exchange, felt that something was amiss and was awake. He found it strange that I wasn't at home. John asked Tom about my whereabouts, but Tom evaded the question. Growing impatient with Tom's evasiveness, John pressed farther, and Tom finally admitted to leaving me in the rain after pulling me out of the car. John, being physically larger than his father Tom, probably intimidated him, as Tom was naturally timid. While they were having a heated argument, the hospital I had barely made it to contacted them, confirming that I was safe. John suggested to Tom that they should go to the hospital to see my condition, but Tom, citing work commitments the next day, declined. Angered by this, John exploded, grabbed Tom by the collar, and shouted, "Why don't you walk to the hospital just like Mom did?" Facing the intimidating presence of the larger John, who seemed ready to strike, a terrified Tom ended up jogging through the rain to the hospital, with John on a crossbike, monitoring him from behind. It must have been extremely strenuous for Tom, who usually doesn't exercise and always uses the car. Seeing the utterly exhausted and worn-out Tom, it all made sense. Once John finished explaining, he looked at me seriously and said, "Mom, you should divorce this guy, right now." Hearing John's words, I was deeply shocked, not because I didn't want a divorce, but because I felt terrible for making my son utter the word divorce. I could only grab John's hand and apologize. After this incident, the relationship between Tom and me grew even colder. I strongly wanted a divorce, but financial issues were a significant obstacle. Being a homemaker, I wasn't confident in raising John on my own if we got divorced. I wondered what Tom thought about all this. Several weeks had passed since I fell ill. One day, while I was doing my usual chores, the landline rang. "Hello? Are you Tom's wife? Nice to meet you. I'm Catherine, one of Tom's colleagues." "Yes, that's me. What's the matter?" "Well, Tom and I are in love with each other, so could you please leave him as soon as possible?" I was taken aback by the unexpected revelation. Tom had been having an affair with Catherine. It turned out that my earlier suspicions, which fell off and led me to doubt his fidelity, were indeed accurate. No way. If I could, I would want to divorce too. Without a moment's hesitation, I blurted out those words. Indeed, this is how I truly felt. I don't care about such a useless man. If he wants me to, I'll let him go without a second thought. Worried about Catherine's response, I tightened my grip on the phone, waiting for her reply. "What? You want to break up? Really?" "Well, that makes things easier. I work at a major company, so don't worry about your living expenses. Tell me how much you want. Can you give me your email? I have loads of evidence of Tom's affair. You can use it to tell him to divorce." I was taken aback by her unexpected proposal, but quickly regained my composure. Realizing I couldn't miss this golden opportunity, I immediately shared my email address. Soon after, numerous pieces of evidence of the affair were sent to me. There were intimate pictures and messages of them making date plans, more than enough as evidence. That night, after John had gone to bed, I approached Tom, who was having a drink. "Hey, Tom, we need to talk about something important." Without taking his eyes off of TV, he grunted, "What is it?" Irritated by his attitude, I turned off the TV he was watching and slammed a table to get his attention. Taken by surprise, Tom stood up, his face filled with rage. Determined, I confronted him with the divorce papers. Caught off guard, Tom was left dumbfounded. "Let's divorce. You have a woman who's good at housework and work at a major company, right?" "What the hell? You suspect me of cheating? If you think so, show me any evidence." He seemed to believe he left no trace, confidently challenging me. But I was prepared. I boldly showed him the numerous pieces of evidence Catherine had sent. Tom's once confident expression crumbled, and he looked like he was about to cry. "What? Oh, how do you have this? I thought I deleted everything." "Please reconsider the divorce. It would be embarrassing if everyone found out. John needs a father at this age. You won't have enough money by yourself, right?" Tom seemed desperate to avoid the stigma of a man who cheated and got divorced. I thought to myself how selfish he was. "I'm not embarrassed at all, and John doesn't need a father like you. Did you ever act like a real father to John? Don't pretend to care now. If you really want to be responsible, you will provide appropriate child support, right?" Seeing my unwavering determination, Tom held his head in his hands and cried, "This isn't what I expected." 6 months later, we officially divorced. During the divorce, we discussed asset distribution and child support for John. I also claimed a financial apology from Catherine, Tom's affair partner, and she agreed to pay in a lump sum. Thankfully, John and I didn't have to worry about our finances for a while. I felt it would be unfair to make John change schools, so we moved to a nearby apartment. We are now living a cooperative life, just the two of us. I've heard that Tom and Catherine have started living together, but they're both busy with their jobs. Their housework is neglected, and they're always fighting. Catherine probably showed her domestic side to steal Tom from me. Now that he's hers, she's showing her true colors. Later on, their affair became public knowledge, tarnishing the reputation of the major company, resulting in both of them being fired. I received half of his assets during the divorce, so I don't know the specifics of their post-divorce life. But I've heard they're struggling daily without savings. After the divorce, John became even more energetic and devoted to his school club activities. His efforts paid off, and he told me excitedly about playing as a regular in the next match. Seeing him so happy, I was reassured that I made the right decision. I truly felt that watching John grow was my happiness.